God, there is indeed a sweet, sweet spirit in this place, and we know that it is your presence. We know, God, that you are in the midst of us, even when it seems like you are so far away. God, you are here. So God, send your sweet, sweet spirit to be in the words of my mouth. Do what you do best and use a broken vessel like me so that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts may be found acceptable and pleasing in your sight, O God, our rock, our Redeemer, and the one who is in this place. And all those God's people said, Amen. Beloved, I must begin this sermon by telling you that the scriptures that we just read moments ago, the selections from the 13th chapter of John, they're not exactly the reading prescribed for today by the lectionary. They're not exactly the readings that Bible calendar, it's shared by the Christian world, but they're not exactly the readings that we were supposed to read today. In fact, you might recognize that those verses, those selections, they are actually read on Maundy Thursday during Holy Week. Maundy Thursday, it's also known as Holy Thursday. It's the Thursday before Easter Sunday when Jesus, according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, institutes what we will soon celebrate today, Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper. And it's when Jesus, according to John, as we've read, washes the feet of his disciples and gives them a new commandment: love one another just as I have loved you. Maundy, it comes from the Latin word mandatum, and you should know this because Pastor Jay might quiz you on it at some point. It comes from the Latin mandatum, or mandate, and it is this mandate, this new commandment, that is all that the lectionary prescribes that we read today, that we study today, that we sermonize today. And so on this fifth Sunday, count 'em five, fifth Sunday of Easter, 4 weeks after we've already celebrated the resurrection, after together we have journeyed well beyond the empty tomb, I think it is absolutely right of you to ask, why are we going backwards? Why is it that today of all days we are flipping back a few pages in the story? Why is it that we return to this scene of all scenes when it doesn't really seem to ring of resurrection at all? After all, you might ask, isn't the Easter season supposed to be about what happens after the cross? About what happens after the tomb is closed shut? About what happens after death? So why, preacher, you might rightly ask, are we here in the upper room yet again? Well, beloved, allow me to suggest to you this morning that what goes down in the upper room, what Jesus does and how the disciples feel and the situation that they find themselves in, it actually sounds a lot like the moment we find ourselves in right now. It sounds a lot like that moment because it is here in this upper room where Jesus and the disciples, as they gather around a table, there is one amongst them who is just minutes away from betraying them all. They enjoy a meal together even as the religious and imperial authorities have been plotting against them, and they're finally about to get what they want. They share in conversation together even as the people who just a few days before welcomed them with open arms are about to rally against them. It is here in this upper room where Jesus and the disciples feel the full weight of what we might call this morning liminality. The disciples and Jesus, they feel the full weight of what it means to be in the in-between. In between joy and sorrow, in between freedom and arrest, in between life and death itself. And if you can put yourself in that upper room this morning, needless to say, there is a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of despair that fills the upper room. And I don't know about you all, but if I can just be honest with you this morning, if I can just share a little bit of what's on my mind, that anxiety and confusion and despair, I find it in myself too. Even on this side of Easter Sunday, on this side of the empty tomb, I am full of some anxiety and some confusion and a bit of despair. Because we who call ourselves Christians, beloved, we too inhabit a liminal space. We are in the in-betweenness, in between our Lord's resurrection and the second coming, in between this world and the world to come, in between life on this side of the Jordan and life eternal. So yes, beloved, like those in the upper room, I'm a bit anxious today. I'm anxious because at the same time we gather in this beautiful sanctuary and rightly and beautifully proclaim that here at Union, your family at the same time, there are hundreds, if not thousands of people, many of whom look like me, who are being snatched away from their homes and denied due process by this government just so that they can be deported quickly, never to see their families again. Beloved, I'm confused this morning because at the same time that we will turn to the Lord's table and give God thanks and praise for all that God has done to see us through, and praise God that He has seen us through, there are at least 47 million people in this country who today will not have enough to feed themselves or their families, and yet must watch as this president and his allies try to pass a federal budget that will cut food assistance by at least $300 billion, while he gets to accept millions of dollars in bribes in broad daylight. I've got to tell you, I have a bit of despair in me because when we leave this place, I know that we will be surrounded by a community of love and care, but at the same time, I know that we live in a world that tries in every way imaginable to divide us, to tear us down, and convince us that we have to earn our worth by abusing others and even ourselves to achieve power and glory. So yes, beloved, Christ may have risen. Christ may have risen indeed, but I this morning find myself in the upper room. I find myself filled with some confusion, some anxiety, and even some despair. And so this morning, if you so happen to find yourself in that upper room with me, and this morning you've come to Union hoping for a way out of it, I have some bad news for you. The bad news is I don't have an answer for how to rid ourselves of that anxiety and confusion and despair. I don't have an answer for what meets us in this moment. I don't have a way out of this upper room, and frankly, it doesn't really seem like Jesus does either. Because at least right now, in chapter 13, there is no do not worry lesson from the Lord. There is no prayer in chapter 13 that suddenly makes everything okay. And there is not even from Jesus an urgency to leave the upper room at all. What happens in chapter 13 and this new commandment that we are taught, it is not just some formula for being a feel-good, worry-free, it's all part of God's plan type of Christian. That is not what this new commandment is. And if you need some proof of that, I invite you to look no further than the text itself. Look not just at the new commandment, but look at the commandment in the context in which Jesus says it. You know the story. Jesus and his disciples, they are eating their Passover meal, and suddenly, without warning, without telling anyone why, Jesus gets up from the table. He wraps a towel around himself, and he kneels on the ground, and he begins to do the work of a servant. he begins to wash the feet of the others. He begins to wash the feet of Matthew, who was a tax collector, of Thomas, a doubter, of Nathanael, a dreamer, even, by the way, of Judas, the one who already has it in his mind to betray them all. And as Jesus does this, not any of them say a word. The upper room is quiet. Jesus removes their sandals and pours the water and dries their feet, and none of them say anything until Jesus gets to who else but Simon Peter. And before Jesus can even touch his feet, before even a drop of water can touch the disciple, Simon Peter cries out, "Lord, you will never wash my feet. Lord, you will never wash my feet." And those of us who are in the text today, it begs the question, why is it that Simon Peter objects? Why does he object so strongly? Why is he the only one who has an issue with what Jesus is doing? Someone say that's a good question. Because the text doesn't explicitly tell us, but I have a suggestion. The text doesn't tell us why Simon Peter objects, but allow me to suggest to you this morning that Simon Peter objects not because he's a bad follower. He objects not because he's a bad disciple. He objects not because the others know something that he doesn't. Allow me instead to suggest to you that Simon Peter objects to having his feet washed because genuinely, he's just confused. He's just anxious. He just doesn't know what's happening. This is, after all, the same Peter who left everything he had known, his home, his family, his way of life, to follow Jesus. This is the same Peter who trusted Jesus enough to step out onto roaring waters of the sea when no other disciple would even dare try. This is the same Peter who has spent the last 3 years of his life putting it on the line to protect Jesus from the crowds and the religious authorities and the imperial guards. So, beloved, no, I don't think that it's because he lacks faith. I don't think he objects because he lacks trust or that he lacks a love for Jesus. Genuinely, I just think that with everything going on around them, with the betrayer and the crowds and the religious and imperial authorities, and then he sees Jesus do something so out of the ordinary, so unexpected, so unlike anything he's ever seen before, I just think he's confused. I just think he's anxious. He doesn't know what's happening. You have to remember that to Simon Peter, what Jesus is doing here, washing their feet, it's not just beneath Jesus, it's wrong. It's not the way the world is supposed to work. Sure, Simon Peter may not be cultured in the ways of Rome, but he knows that a Lord and a king, especially this Lord and this king, Jesus should not be washing the feet of his disciples, let alone his own. And besides, with everything going on, this is what Jesus chooses to do? Of all the things that Jesus could be doing in this upper room, preparing to fight, preparing to run away, or quite literally anything else, Jesus chooses to wash their feet? Why is this, of all the things, what Jesus does? And amazingly, so unlike the Jesus that we know, Jesus just tells them. He doesn't speak in a riddle. He doesn't come up with a parable. He doesn't show them another sign. I think Jesus just sensed what was in the room. Confusion and anxiety and despair, and so Jesus just tells them. Jesus just lays it out. He just makes it plain, and Jesus says, "Unless I wash your feet, you have no share with me. You call me teacher and you call me Lord, and you are right, that is what I am. So if I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. just as I have loved you. And I know that we know this verse, but I want you to notice what it is that Jesus does not say. Jesus does not chastise Simon Peter for objecting to having his feet washed. Jesus doesn't tell Simon Peter that he should just bury the strong feelings that he has in this moment. Jesus doesn't tell the other disciples to just pretend that what they are going through right now isn't happening. He doesn't try to comfort them with empty platitudes. Because, beloved, this commandment, this new commandment to love one another, you have to know that it isn't about forgetting the world. No, this new commandment to love one another, it's about reimagining the world. It's about reorienting ourselves and transforming our perspective to realize that even in the liminality, even in the in-betweenness, even in the anxiety and confusion and despair, even in the moments that don't make any sense to us, love abounds. And it abounds all the more. Because watch, Jesus does not wash the feet of his disciples when everything is okay. Jesus does not wash the feet of his disciples when the disciples have it all together. He doesn't do this when the world makes any sense. No, Jesus gets up from the table precisely when things aren't all right. The Son of God wraps a towel around his waist when we don't have it all together. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords kneels down in front of us and takes the sandals off of our feet and pours water on us to wash the dirt away precisely when the world doesn't make any sense. It is days before the resurrection. Days before the empty tomb, it is in this upper room on Holy Thursday where the same love that is poured out on a cross and unleashed into the world when the stone is rolled away, that same love is already there. It's already present. Because it is precisely in the liminality when Jesus cares deeply for his friends. It is in this in-between space where Jesus acts out of unexpected compassion for the one that will betray him. It is when things don't make any sense that Jesus radically loves the one who objects to having his feet washed in the first place. Days before he will rise again, Jesus is already embodying the resurrection. Days before he will rise again, he is already exemplifying a new, more excellent way. Days before he will rise again, Jesus is already showing us what the abundant life is. And it is simply to wash one another's feet, to love one another. The hymn writer puts it this way: oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus. Vast, unmeasured, boundless, and free. Underneath me and all around me is the current of his love, leading onward, leading homeward to his glorious rest above. And that is some good news for us today. Yes, the love of Jesus, that's some good news for us today. But beloved, I have more good news. Because Jesus does not stop at his love for us. Jesus does not stop at what Jesus can do for us, because Jesus continues. He says, I have washed your feet, and now you ought to wash one another's feet. Just as I have loved you, you ought to love one another. And I know that it sounds like a simple direction. I know that it sounds like a simple commandment, one that we have heard many, many times before. But beloved, hear me this morning when I say that there is something more transformative happening here. Because when Jesus says this, Jesus is pointing the disciples not to himself. Jesus is not pointing the disciples to his own power or his own might or his own glory. Jesus is pointing the disciples back to themselves. Jesus is pointing the disciples to their own power in this moment when they feel oh so powerless. He is pointing them to their own agency when it seems that they don't have any. Jesus is pointing the disciples to their own worth when everything around them is telling them that they have none. Jesus is saying to the disciples, you, yes, you right here and right now in this moment in this upper room, you have the power to do for others what I have done for you. He says, yes, I know that the resurrection, it can seem so far away today. I know that in this moment, the abundant life, it can seem impossible. I know that a new, a more excellent way today, it seems like a fantasy. But the resurrection is already here because it's already here in you. In you, who despite everything that's happening around you, you who wash the feet of your friends. In you, who despite the pain that you have endured, have the strength to wash the feet of the one who betrays you. In you, who despite the need to stay strong, are bold enough in this moment to say, yes, I need my feet washed too. So yes, beloved, we proclaim this day the deep, deep love of Jesus, vast, unmeasured, and boundless and free. But I came by to tell you this morning that the same love in all of its depth and its vastness and its freedom, that same love is found in each and every one of you. It is already embodied in you. It is resurrecting the world in you today. You who sit in this pew right now. And yes, you who find yourself in an upper room. Thomas Merton, the Catholic priest and theologian, said it oh so beautifully. If I am to love my sibling, I must somehow enter deep into the mystery of God's love for them. I must be moved not only by human sympathy, but by divine sympathy which is revealed to us in Jesus. My love for others, it must be to them the sacrament of the mysterious and infinitely selfless love God has for them. The words I speak to another must be no other than the words of Christ, who reveals himself through me. Beloved, Christ reveals himself through me and through you and through us, even and especially in the liminality, even and especially in the in-betweenness, even and especially in the moments that don't make sense. Christ is already here because Christ is in each of you. And what more can we say? But thanks be to God. Thanks be to God.